Well, how are you?
I'm doing good.
That's fantastic. How are you guys?
Wait.
That's great. That's fantastic. We here are doing SaaS Coach today on Wednesday, and typically talking all things how to grow and make great software companies. We did a previous series on conversion. This series is all about retention. How do we keep those? And last time I said bear hug your users so they can't get away.
Not too tight.
Not too tight, but you wanna make sure that you bear hug them. And so we're really talking about retention, reducing churn rates. We've gone through a number of episodes talking about some tips of how to improve your retention and decrease those churn rates. And it's been a good series of discussions so far. So episode 6.
Episode 6. So we're talking experience journey mapping today, which is a really interesting concept. We're going to show some examples, some big brands and how they do it. But Andy, I'd love to hear how you approach it.
Yeah, I think, so journey mapping can fit into a lot of different things. People do it when you're talking about the marketing and sales process. What's the journey of a prospect? The first time that they see your brand name, all the ways through they become a customer, and what steps there are. In the sales process, there's a lot of journey mapping of, okay, a lead comes in and then we send a follow-up email, and you're really just talking about in all of these, what is the flow of steps that you're interacting, every touch point that you're having with someone. And when it comes to software, one thing that you can do is go beyond the marketing and the sales into them being a user, so that, first touch point of registering and then logging in for the first time, hitting that dashboard, and then moving through the experience of utilizing the software and all the ways out to what does it look like on a repeated basis of use, into what happens in the time when they're looking to renew or cancel, and building out literally every one of those interactions to understand what the process is. And then there's some ways that we'll talk about that you can break that apart to really help understand and improve it.
So what I find interesting is, in looking at some of the maps we're going to look at, it's really about really understanding that customer, because not only are you walking through the product and the different features and different screens that we're going through, but in the life cycle of that customer, of their subscription, whether that's month to month or year to year, kind of where they're at and how you can address them differently at different stages. And I think to understand it, the mapping helps incredibly so that you can implement the appropriate touch points so that you're saying the right things to point out certain features that'll be more valuable at the right time and place.
Yeah. The two things that I really try and look at in experience mapping is, each of these touch points, physical and emotional.
Yeah.
So there is a physical thing that they're doing, and there's an emotional thing that they're feeling at that stage. But then really on your side of the mapping, it's what do you want physically to happen, and how can you exceed expectations at that standpoint? And then also, how do you exceed the emotional expectations? We've seen this big in marketing where, brands like Warby Parker, you order a pair of glasses, and the first email you get these series of emails, and that's the physical experience. But then the emotional is that they, send you examples of what other people look like in the glasses, and kind of get you excited that if there's a week till you get your glasses, you're kind of having this physical and emotional experience that are touch points prior to getting it. And then after you get the product, you get more touch points where they're then trying to manipulate the physical and emotional feelings to hopefully either get you as a further customer or get referrals or whatever it might be, and just build that happiness. Same thing in developing software is, we have a physical reaction of a registration. What's the emotion that they want, that this is easy and confident, but then what do we want to make sure that they feel physically and feel emotionally? And then you look through and come up with ideas at each of these stages to say, how can we physically exceed what they're looking for, and how can we emotionally exceed what they want? And so when you take it up and you separate all these touch points and you sit down with a team and you say, okay, let's brainstorm for this one touch point, registration. dashboard view, adding a new user or coworker to the platform. How can we physically improve the experience, which is a lot of UI, UX, but then how can we emotionally do it? Is there something fun or interesting, or can we reduce fear or whatever it might be? And so we're really brainstorming, trying to manipulate that physical and emotional feeling at each of these touch points. And to me, that's really what the journey mapping piece is about, is how do you break these apart and then really tactically think about how you manipulate the situation to provide a better experience and make it great.
I would make the case that a product, software that really focuses on this experience and really understands their customer, if they had a very limited feature set, only does one or two things, very simple, can be much more valuable software than something that doesn't consider this and packs in a bunch of different features in there, right? So the value that you can increase to your customers is tremendous.
Well, that's it. Yeah, if you limit down the features, but you're making each one of them physically and emotionally great.
Yeah.
But then the other thing that ties into this that sometimes people forget is take that add a new user, add your coworker. You want in the journey that someone registers for your software, and to make it successful that they need to add people. So one of the first things that happens is it pops up a screen and says, do you want to invite some of your coworkers? Well, there's not just that screen, but there's the physical experience of I added this. Now what do I see? Does it say, this person has been sent a message? Can you customize that? What does the email that goes out that's sent to them? Do you also get a confirmation in your email and saying this happened? And so, these steps can become very minute. And again, it's kind of like that Warby Parker example. You buy a product and most companies send you a invoice and a shipping notification. But in that week that you're actually waiting for your product to get these more fun emails that are about how you can use your glasses and how they might look, and all this stuff, it's an emotional experience then. And for software, you would think the normal thing is, okay, you put in your coworker's email address and it pops up a message that says done. But does that have to really be the simplicity of it, and are you truly delivering an exceeded physical and emotional response to that action that someone took?
So how do we maximize those touch points?
Exactly.
Right? That message, is it complete, or is it something more profound that talks to the user where they're at in that stage when they're performing that task? I think that's great. In the Warby Parker example, the creating anticipation, that's really a cool concept. There's a number of companies that do that, but I always found that a really great tactic to, where people expect that monthly shipment and they're expecting whatever that piece is, right? And you kind of enjoy that.
Yeah. Make it more than just the purely transactional.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that software companies forget about. They're so focused on the interface of, how do we make things transactional? How do we just quickly provide a response that X happened? Or, this notification goes out and it's very plain. But I think there are opportunities, if you want to create a better experience, to either add in steps to the journey and say, okay, by adding these 2 steps after X, this makes it a much better journey, and we can exceed their physical and emotional expectations, but then also within each of those stages saying, what could we do a little bit better, within this to make it something interesting? So
for sure.
That's definitely, there's a science to this that I think, again, when people think about journey mapping, sitting down, taking the time, thinking through it, breaking it out into this physical and emotional. If you follow, again, we've talked about it a lot, structured processes, this stuff becomes easier and more effective for sure. So just some, and these are really hard to see, but this is kind of that Starbucks experience map, and you can look this up. Go on Google and look up Starbucks experience map. But this is an interesting one of each of the touch points. So anticipate, enter their place, engage, exit, reflect. So you're talking about in anticipation, they're in the office or the car, enter as they walk in, engage mixes the line, order, pay, sit, drink, work. exiting is packing up, and then walking out, and reflect is what's in the car after it. So they've literally mapped out the entire journey of what it looks like for somebody, and then they talk about like what happens within each of those. What happens when I sit, grab my drink and look for a place to sit. I need most important an outlet and workspace. So they're kind of thinking in the mindset of the person and truly building that out. Which I think is cool. And then the top half here has some like experience of like what's normal and what's enriched. And it's like, comfortable sofa and chair is slightly above.
Aroma, right?
Aroma when you entered in. Does you have the great smell? Free Wi-Fi. So this is a great example of what we're kind of talking about is with emotional experience as well as physical. They're kind of mixing emotional and physical, but they are very clearly stating of like, this is what a normal would be, here's the baseline, and here's how we exceed it. And I think that this could be a great way for a software company. You have each of your stages of registration, onboarding, usage, renewal, etc. And then you're looking at what can we physically and emotionally do to exceed that stage.
You got to pull that free Wi-Fi off of there nowadays.
Free Wi-Fi is definitely baseline.
10 years old, right?
Yeah, right.
Back then that was exceeding.
So I mean, it's really interesting. I think that this is, again, a quick example of how people can look at building one out. And again, there's a lot of different structures for these types of documents, whatever fits you, but it's really the exercise of mapping it out and then understanding what's the baseline and how do you exceed physical and emotional.
And I think last point on the Starbucks one is you go to Starbucks, what does Starbucks sell? They sell coffee and drinks, right? And it's funny because just one little point on here says good drink.
Good drink.
Right? So that's just one little point. So I think, by enhancing in other places, it's increasing the value beyond just that one good drink.
This one from IKEA, this is more about a physical movement. As you go through and understanding how people move around a store, store location, does it satisfy, parking is kind of a neutral experience, and they're kind of mapping out where people might feel. Indoor decoration, are we gratifying? DIY shopping tools, the round tour that you kind of move around, is that good or bad or neutral? Product quality, price, display settings. So they're really working through the different ways that people think about the journey of looking at IKEA's products and then mapping them on, how different people feel and what they've rated before in that usage. And this is an interesting one that if you are leveraging what they're actually doing here is rating people and getting a sense of what people feel about these different pieces of the journey. Is then you can do an evaluation of how do we change each of these. And the same thing could happen in your journey map is that, instead of getting feedback on a feature or feedback on your whole software, you go and you get a specific feedback on an interaction or on a specific feature so that you understand as someone's journeying and using your software, what are the individual ratings of that experience?
Yeah, that's a big one, right? I think.
Well, you always want to get feedback
specific to a particular feature, not just overall. What do you think?
Right. Like Net Promoter Score is the high level. Would you renew? Would you share this with someone else and say this is a great product? But I would like to get a sense in the journey. How was onboarding experience? What was the experience of adding coworkers to it? If you can gather some of that information, that is something that can be valuable to map out the person's experience and how they are feeling, and then know whether you really need to focus on that area. This one's an interesting one of kind of a repeatable process, things that happen in a circle, and that does happen a lot in software is that, people come back and they're doing the same things over and over a lot of times. So sometimes our journeys have to be someone enters in, but then they get into a stage where they're continuing to do things over time. They get the first bill, a letter, then a problem, making a payment, they get a promotion, and they're kind of going around, and by the time they come back, they start the process all over again. So there are journeys, and especially in software, that are circular. And so it's important to kind of think about that. Really for software, it's kind of this: you come in, you go in a circle for a while, and eventually come out. And it's really looking at, how can you map that out as part of it. And then we've got this one that really just, again, kind of walks through a brand experience of someone, checks whether something exists, looks for a recommendation, does some more searching, talks with friends, order and payment. So again, this one kind of shows a little bit of even what happens outside of the physical experiences, like talking with friends. I think that's a great example, is that you could even put in the journey that as someone's onboarding, they're sharing with the coworkers, or they're potentially doing internal training, or whatever it might be with your software product, is that there are interactions that happen that you're not controlling necessarily physically, but you may want to come up with a way to exceed the physical or emotional reaction. A great thought would be onboarding and training, is that you may want to think, okay, this person, and we have someone on our team, when a new employee comes in, we train them on how to use some of our software. And the question is have we put that in our journey, and have we thought about ways to improve the physical and emotional process for those people that are kind of outside of what we're doing? Is there a way we could put in a training portal or a checklist that can easily be sent to another employee for them to walk through, and that physically exceeds our trainers' experience. Emotionally, it makes them it easier and more streamlined. And then also on the new employee standpoint, we're controlling their experience of the onboarding. So I think there's some ways that when we're doing these journey maps, it's easy to say, okay, I'm just going to list like onboarding, registration, login, add this item, search this, but we're not necessarily including that stuff that happens outside of what we're doing.
It's all about increasing the efficiency or the effectiveness of during each step. So interesting stuff.
Yeah. And this is kind of another circular one. And again, one of the reasons to show all this is kind of that there's a lot of different ways that you can evaluate it. This one's really just kind of more of a physical journey. Again, going to the airport, getting into customs, after you're in customs, actually coming to the physical location because this is for a casino, then going on boarding, in flight, behind customs, get back to your destination, return home. This is a lot more of a physical one, but it's a neat way to look at it, and then still you can break that up. If you're having a consumer app that's very on the go, people are using it as they're moving about, this is a great way to potentially do that. We even talked to a company that was looking at that, where they want to interact with people that were frequent flyers. This is a great type of map because not only is the app happening physically in the features, but a lot of times those interactions are happening at specific physical locations. And so really mapping that out can help give you insight that if someone's in the middle of the line for security and they're trying to figure something out, and they have to put their phone down, what happens when they pick their phone back up? What's the physical and emotional experience? So there's some reasons to do this stuff as well, depending on your type of software.
Super interesting. It gives, I think there's a lot of ways you can start to get ideas for ways to enhance that experience just by having the awareness of that journey, because I think a lot of times we're talking to that ideal customer, what's their usage, and we're looking at it almost like we said, we want to know each feature, right? Feedback on each feature. So the user isn't just this kind of static thing, it's their feelings and thoughts and needs are changing throughout the whole journey. And that's what you need to be aware of, so you could start to be more effective and efficient when you're speaking to them at different points.
Well, and I think the biggest in this, and the reason this is part of the episode, we're talking about retention. We're talking about reducing churn rates. as I talk to clients, and especially that we work a lot in the software space, when you ask, hey, how is your journey map, or what have you built out for that?
Yeah.
Most software companies haven't done it. It's just not something that they think of. Maybe their marketing team has done it, and depending if they have an internal marketing team, it may even just be something very simple. But I do think that if you are going to be a legitimate software business and you really want to grow and retain customers, that if you don't have something like this in your office, and I would physically put it up, because this is as important as anything, is making sure that everyone on our team, the developers, the support team, the sales team, they understand the journey and they understand the importance of physically and emotionally exceeding expectations and making sure the entire team leads up to it. So, one of the reasons I thought I was excited for this episode is I do think journey mapping's probably one of the most important aspects for a software company to do, not just for retention, but again, general customer satisfaction and getting referrals, marketing, and including what's the process from the first time they get through to the time that they leave. And again, just rallying the entire team around this idea of, we understand our customer, we understand what they're going through, and we are always looking for ways to exceed how they feel and what they get from us.
Yeah.
So I would, this is kind of that call to action of, hey, if you have a software business and you haven't built a really fantastic journey map, guess what? The next 5 hours, that's what you should focus on. And then, make sure you get printed out and put on the team and talk about it, and then come back to it every month and re-brainstorm around this. What are we missing? What have other people learned? That there's new steps in the journey? Are there newer ideas to exceed these expectations? So This is one of those ones, kind of like analytics. If you don't have analytics on your site today, you better go do it. Same thing with journey map. If you don't have this is something that is worth the time to sit down and put together.
Well, that's a great comparison, analytics, because I was just going to say there's so much to take and learn from this that it can't just be an exercise you do once and then buried in a file away somewhere. It's something that stays with you, like your analytics. You're constantly looking at, constantly checking, because you can always keep continuing to learn and improve based on that. So
Agreed. Yeah.
Cool stuff. And I think it's easy to overlook this whole experience, Matt.
It is. I mean, I think a lot of people that are in the software space may not even know about it. It's not something they're aware of, and then it's easily one of those things that maybe somebody brings up and it goes on a list somewhere, and it's a nice to have. But I actually don't think this is one of those nice to haves. I think it's a have to have. So definitely one of those scenarios. We had a couple more, but I really think we showed a good bit. What do we have for next show? So next Wednesday, really talking about responsibility, which will be good. So
cool. Basically
responsibility, who's in charge of retention, how are you thinking about it, what's the process of, again, kind of having someone that's a czar in charge of making sure that you're constantly keeping customers and reducing churn rates.
Because it's a challenge and something that has to be addressed by all businesses.
Right.
And if someone is not specifically responsible for it, then nobody is.
That's exactly
really
right.
important one.
Yeah. So this was, hopefully you got some value out of journey mapping. I will say it again, I really think if you haven't done a journey map, now's the time to start building one. We're happy to help. Give us a call, send us a message. We can send you some of the examples that we've got, or even we've got some services to help guide clients through the process and some tools and documents that we use in building that process. So definitely check that out and come and visit our show next week. Go check out some of the past episodes, and it's all gravy from here, right?
Figure out who's in charge next week.
That's right, we will.
All right.
All right, everybody.